Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story about power, obsession, and a woman who controlled a kingdom from a bed that wasn't hers. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In 1547, a woman walked into the palace of Fontainebleau wearing black and white, the colours of mourning. She'd been wearing them for 12 years, but she wasn't mourning anymore. She was marking territory. Her name was Diane de Poitiers. She was 48 years old, and she'd just become the most powerful woman in France. Not because she was queen. She wasn't. The queen, Catherine de Medici, was sitting in another wing of the palace, pregnant again, powerless again, watching her husband's mistress redecorate the throne room. Diane didn't just sleep with the king. She ran his kingdom, signed state documents, appointed ministers, commissioned chateaux. Her initials were carved into the stone of every royal building, her cipher intertwined with the king's monogram on everything from tapestries to treaties. And here's the part they don't teach you in history class. The king was 20 years younger than her. She'd met him when he was a boy, trained him, shaped him. Some say seduced him when he was still a teenager. And when he became King Henry II of France, he didn't just keep her as a mistress, he made her co-ruler. But what passengers didn't know was that Diane had been planning this for decades, since the moment she saw a broken boy return from Spanish captivity and recognised an opportunity. What she did with that broken boy reveals a shocking truth about power in Renaissance France. However, even more disturbing is what happened when the king died in a tournament. His skull split open by a lance, and 20 years of absolute power ended in a single afternoon. So settle in. This is going to take a while. 1499, southeastern France, the Château de Saint-Vallier. Diane de Poitiers was born into a family trying very hard not to drown. Her father, Jean de Poitiers, was noble. Technically, he had a title, some land, a chateau that needed repairs they couldn't afford, the kind of nobility that meant you were still invited to court but had to carefully hide the holes in your gloves. Her mother died when Diane was young. No one wrote down how, childbirth probably, or one of the dozens of fevers that killed women before they hit 30. Doesn't matter. She died. And Diane, the eldest daughter, suddenly had responsibilities. Imagine being 7 years old and understanding that your beauty is currency, that your face might be the only thing standing between your family and complete ruin. Because that's what pretty daughters were, investment opportunities. You fed them, dressed them nicely, taught them to curtsy and smile and say charming things that meant nothing, and then you sold them to the highest bidder, to the man who could elevate your family's status or at least pay off some debts. Diane grew up knowing this, watching, learning. She learned how to enter a room, how to make men notice without appearing to try, how to speak just enough to seem interesting without revealing any actual thoughts, how to be beautiful without threatening. These weren't natural skills, they were survival tools, practiced, perfected, necessary. By the time she was 14, Diane was stunning. Pale skin that looked like carved marble, dark hair that caught light, the kind of face that made men forget what they were saying mid-sentence. Her father saw the potential. Finally, after years of declining income and mounting debts, after watching other noble families rise while his stagnated, after running out of options, his daughter was beautiful. And beauty in 16th century France was more valuable than gold. So in 1515, he made a deal. The groom's name was Louis de Braise, Grand Seneschal of Normandy, one of the most powerful men in France, close personal friend of King Francis I, wealthy beyond measure, and 56 years old. Diane was 15. Pause for a moment. Really think about that. 15. Still a child in so many ways. Your body barely finished growing. your mind still forming, your understanding of the world limited to whatever your tutors and servants had told you, and you're being sold to a man who was already middle-aged when you were born. The wedding took place in spring. Diane wore white, stood beside a man whose hand trembled slightly when he lifted her veil. Not from emotion, from age. The wedding night happened, it always happened. That's what the marriage was for. To produce heirs, to seal alliances, to turn a girl into a wife, and a wife into a mother as quickly as possible. No one asked if she was ready. No one cared if she was frightened. You were a wife now. You had duties, you performed them. The bedding ceremony was public, because of course it was. Witnesses needed to confirm the marriage was consummated, that the alliance was legitimate, that the girl hadn't somehow escaped her fate. They led Diane to the marriage bed, dressed in a thin linen shift, barely covering anything, while courtiers and family members watched, made jokes, laughed. She climbed into bed, 15 years old, shaking, trying not to cry because crying would be unseemly. Louis climbed in after her, 56 years old, breathing heavy, smelling of wine and old man sweat. The witnesses drew the curtains. Finally, some privacy, but they didn't leave. They waited outside, listening, for sounds that would confirm the deed was done. What happened next? We don't talk about what happened next. Diane never did. But here's what we know. It hurt. Of course it hurt. She was 15, a virgin, and he was not gentle because gentle wasn't required. This was a transaction. You paid for goods. You used them. She bled. They all did. The sheets would be examined in the morning. Proof of virginity. Proof the marriage was legitimate. And when it was over, when Louis rolled off her and started snoring almost immediately, Diane lay there, staring at the bed canopy, feeling something tear inside her that had nothing to do with her body, understanding that this was her life now, this man, this bed, this duty, forever. She was 15 years old, and she'd just learned what powerlessness really meant. The first year was the hardest, learning to endure, learning to separate your mind from your body, learning to go somewhere else while it happened. Diane developed a technique. When Louis came to her bed, and he came often that first year, desperate for a son, she'd imagine herself floating above the scene, looking down at this girl in the bed and the old man grunting on top of her. Not me, she'd think. That's not me. That's just a body. I'm somewhere else. It was the only way to survive. But here's the thing about survival. It makes you strategic, makes you start looking for advantages, for ways to turn a terrible situation into something useful. Diane was smart, dangerously smart, and she started paying attention. She noticed that Louis was more generous after sex, that he'd give her things, jewellery, money for her household, permission to redecorate. So she learned to ask for things at the right moments, when he was satisfied, when he felt magnanimous, when guilt or affection made him pliable. She learned how to make him feel powerful, desirable, virile, even though he was old and she was performing and both of them probably knew it. She learned that men, even old, powerful men, were predictable, manageable, if you knew what they needed. Louis needed to feel young, potent, still capable of satisfying a beautiful young wife. So Diane made him feel that way, performed pleasure, made the right sounds, told him he was wonderful, that she was satisfied, that she'd never known such a lover. Lies, all lies, but they worked, and in return, Louis gave her things. Control of household accounts, her own staff, increasing authority over his estates. He was grateful in his way, grateful that this beautiful young wife didn't flinch when he touched her, didn't cry, didn't make him feel like the monster he probably knew he was. Within a year, she was pregnant. That was the goal after all. Get the girl pregnant, produce an heir, secure the succession. The pregnancy was miserable. 15-year-old bodies aren't meant to carry children. Her hips too narrow, her frame too small. She was sick constantly, vomiting, dizzy, in pain. No one cared. Pregnancy was a woman's duty. You endured it. And if you died, well, your husband would remarry. The system would continue. Diane didn't die. She gave birth to a daughter, Louise. Not a son, disappointing, but acceptable. Women could inherit property if there were no male heirs. The birth nearly killed her. Labour lasted 30 hours. Her body too small for what it was trying to do. She screamed, begged for it to stop, begged for death. The midwives just kept working. This was normal. All women went through this. Stop complaining. When the baby finally came, Diane bled. A lot. Too much. The midwives couldn't stop it. They stuffed her with rags, made her drink bitter teas, prayed. She survived, barely. Spent weeks recovering. Weak, anemic. Her body destroyed by what it had just done. And the moment she was healed enough, Louis was back. Because they needed a son. A daughter wasn't enough. They needed to try again. 2 years later, another daughter, Françoise. Another brutal pregnancy. Another near-death experience during childbirth. Another disappointment because it wasn't a boy. Still no son. Louis was disappointed but not cruel about it. He kept trying, kept visiting her bedchamber with the grim determination of a man completing an unpleasant but necessary task. Diane kept performing, kept smiling, kept learning, because while her body belonged to her husband, her mind was free, and she used it. She studied the court, the politics, the power structures, who had influence, who was rising, who was falling. She watched how men negotiated, how alliances formed, how enemies were destroyed. Louis was friends with King Francis I, which meant Diane had access. She attended court functions, dinners, festivals, tournaments. She saw how power worked, really worked. Not the fairy tale version where kings rule and everyone obeys. The real version where favour mattered more than titles, where proximity to power was power. She saw Queen Claude, the actual queen, Francis I's wife, sweet, pious, constantly pregnant, completely irrelevant. The king barely acknowledged her, kept mistresses openly. The most famous was Diane de Poitiers, beautiful, young, influential. She attended council meetings, advised the king, made policy decisions, while Queen Claude embroidered in her chambers and gave birth to her 7th child and slowly died of exhaustion before she hit 30. Diane watched and understood. Being queen meant nothing. Being wanted meant everything. She also saw Louise of Savoy, the king's mother. Now she had power. Real power. When Francis went to war, Louise ruled France as regent, made decisions, signed treaties, appointed ministers. She wasn't queen, didn't need to be. She was the king's mother. The woman he trusted, the woman he needed. And Diane thought, that's the position to have. Not wife, mother, the woman who shaped the king, who was there first, who could never be replaced. She filed that information away. For later, for when it might be useful. But first, she had to survive the next decade. 11 years. That's how long Diane spent as Louis de Brazy's wife. 11 years of performing the role of dutiful spouse. 11 years of managing his estates, hosting his parties, raising his daughters, sharing his bed. 11 years of waiting. She was good at waiting. Patient. Strategic. She didn't rage against her circumstances. Didn't plot dramatic escapes or take forbidden lovers. She played the role perfectly. The elegant wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who knew her place. Meanwhile, she built networks, cultivated friendships with powerful women, made herself useful to Louis's political allies, learned estate management so well that Louis increasingly trusted her with financial decisions. By the time Louis was in his 60s, Diane was essentially running his estates. He'd signed documents she prepared, approve decisions she'd already made, trust her judgment over his stewards. She was preparing. For what she didn't know yet, but she understood that opportunity, favoured the prepared, that when her moment came, she needed to be ready. And in 1526 something happened that would change everything. King Francis I went to war with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the Battle of Pavia in northern Italy. Francis rode out confident. He had more troops, better positioning. The advantage he lost, catastrophically, captured, humiliated, dragged to Spain as a prisoner of the emperor, and to secure his release, to prove he'd honour whatever peace treaty they negotiated, he had to send collateral. His sons, Francis and Henry, 7 and 8 years old, children, sent to a Spanish prison as insurance that their father wouldn't break his word. The Alcazar of Madrid, a fortress, stone walls 3 feet thick, narrow windows that let in almost no light, guards who spoke no French, food that was barely edible, and 2 little boys who didn't understand why they were there. Francis, the heir, was 8. Henry, the spare, was 7. They'd been taken from their home, told they were going on a journey, not told it was to a prison, not told they might never come back. The first night was the worst. They were put in a cell, not a bedroom, a cell, stone floor, single narrow bed, a bucket in the corner for a toilet, the door locked behind them, heavy iron. The sound echoed. Francis started crying immediately. He was 8, still young enough to cry without shame, still young enough to believe someone would come comfort him. No one came. Henry didn't cry, not yet. He climbed onto the bed with his brother, held him, said things like, "It'll be fine, and Father will come get us soon, and this is just temporary." He didn't believe any of it, but Francis needed to hear it. The days blurred together. They were let out of their cell for lessons. A Spanish tutor who barely spoke to them, who taught them Spanish through repetition and slaps when they got it wrong. They were fed twice a day. Bread, cheese, watered wine, sometimes meat that smelled questionable. They ate it anyway. Hunger made you eat anything. They were allowed to exercise in a courtyard, once a day for an hour. Guards, watching, making sure they didn't try to escape, as if 2 children could escape a fortress. And at night, they went back to their cell, locked in, together. The only comfort was each other. Francis talked about home, about the palaces, the gardens, the food, their father, their stepmother, the life they'd left behind. Henry stopped listening after a while. It hurt too much. Remembering? Because remembering made you hope, and hope made it worse when nothing changed. After 6 months, Francis stopped talking about home, stopped asking when they'd leave, stopped believing rescue was coming. He learned to charm instead. The guards, the tutor, anyone who might make their lives slightly less miserable. He smiled, made jokes, performed. It worked. Sometimes the guards brought them extra food. Sometimes the tutor was kinder. Francis learned that performance brought comfort. Henry learned something else. He learned that safety was a lie, that parents would abandon you, that love had limits, that you were disposable. He stopped talking, went inside himself, built walls, survived by shutting down. By year 2, they'd stopped being brothers. They were just 2 boys in a cell, sharing space, barely speaking, each alone in his own survival. By year 3, they'd stopped being children. Something in them had broken, something you needed to trust the world, to believe in safety, to hope. They became objects, tools, property, things to be traded when the adults finally finished negotiating. And in 1530 they were finally released. 4 years of psychological torture, 4 years of understanding they were worth less than their father's freedom. The treaty was signed, the ransom paid. They were returned to France. Francis, the elder, walked off the ship smiling, waving, playing the part of the brave prince who'd endured captivity with grace. He'd learned to perform, to hide trauma under charm. Henry walked off silent, thin, his eyes older than his years, hollow. He was 11 years old, and he'd learned things no child should know. That safety was an illusion, that parents would abandon you, That trust was a weakness that could destroy you, that you were disposable, always disposable. He'd learned to shut down, to close off, to protect himself by never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. And Diane de Poitiers, 31 years old, elegant and calculating, saw him, really saw him. Not the prince, not the heir's younger brother, but the broken boy underneath, the one who flinched at loud noises, who stood at the edges of rooms, who watched everything and trusted nothing. She recognized him, because she understood what it was to perform, to smile when you wanted to scream, to be used by powerful men who didn't see you as human. And she saw opportunity. The boy needed someone, anyone, something stable in a world that had proven itself unreliable. His father was a king, distracted, busy, guilty probably, though he'd never admit it, too focused on his heir, his golden boy Francis, to pay much attention to his damaged second son. His mother was dead. She died in 1524 before the Spanish captivity. Henry barely remembered her. Just vague impressions, soft hands, a kind voice, nothing concrete. His stepmother, Eleanor of Austria, was kind enough, but she was Spanish, the sister of Charles V, the emperor who'd imprisoned him. Henry couldn't look at her without remembering stone walls and locked doors and guards who didn't speak French. Every time she spoke Spanish, which she did often, it was her native language, Henry flinched. The sound made his chest tight, made him want to hide. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. He was home. He was safe now. He should be grateful. But Henry didn't feel safe, didn't feel grateful, felt like a stranger in his own home. Like at any moment, someone might decide to send him away again. He had no one, was no one. The spare prince, the backup, the one they'd gambled with and nearly lost. He needed someone who saw him, who understood, who didn't expect him to perform gratitude for a rescue that came 4 years too late. Diane could be that person, if she was careful. She didn't approach him directly. That would be obvious, suspicious. Instead, she was just there, at court functions, in gardens, at dinner parties hosted by her husband, who was friends with the king. And when Henry was there, silent, watchful, isolated, she noticed him, smiled at him, not flirtatiously, not like he was a conquest, like he mattered. She asked him about his reading, what he thought of certain books, which authors he preferred. She didn't talk down to him, didn't treat him like a child who needed protection or a prince who needed flattery. She treated him like a person, maybe the first person who had in years. Henry noticed, of course he noticed. She was beautiful, kind, interested in what he had to say. She listened when he spoke, which almost no one did. She remembered details from previous conversations. She made him feel seen, and she was safe. She was married, older, elegant. She wasn't trying to seduce him or use him or hurt him, or so he thought. The truth? Diane was absolutely using him, but she was patient, strategic. This wasn't a short-term play. This was an investment that might take years to pay off, because something could happen to Francis. The heir could die, illness, accident, assassination. It happened all the time. Sons who were supposed to be king just died, and then the spare became the heir. And if Francis died, Henry would become heir, future king. And if Diane had built trust with him now, while he was young and vulnerable and desperate for someone to care about him, she'd have a king, her king, devoted to her, dependent on her, willing to give her anything. That was worth waiting for, so she waited. She built trust. She became his friend, his confidant, the person he could talk to when he felt isolated or frightened or angry. She let him tell her about Spain, the things he'd never told anyone else, the locked doors, the guards, the cold, the hunger, the fear. She listened, didn't judge, didn't tell him he should be over it, didn't tell him he should be grateful to be home, just listened and said things like, "That sounds terrifying," and No child should go through that, and you're safe now. He believed her, started trusting her, started needing her. She was 31. He was 11. Nothing physical. Not yet. She was too smart for that, too patient, too aware that crossing that line too early would destroy everything. But she was planting seeds, building dependence, creating a bond that would, in time, become unbreakable. And then in 1531, Louis de Brezé died. Diane was 32 years old, a widow. Finally, free. That's what widowhood meant for Diane. Not sadness, freedom. Louis had been kind enough, generous even, but he'd been old. The marriage had been a transaction, and now the transaction was complete. She was wealthy. Louis had left her substantial estates, money, property, investments. She was financially independent, which was rare for women. She didn't need another husband to survive, and that meant she had choices, real choices. Men lined up immediately. Of course they did. She was beautiful, rich, connected. Any number of nobles would have been thrilled to marry the widow de Brezé. Offers poured in, some from men her age, some from men younger, some from men who'd watched her for years and waited for this moment. She refused them all. Instead, she made a declaration. She would remain in mourning, permanent mourning. For the rest of her life, she would wear only black and white, widow's colours, a symbol of her eternal devotion to her late husband. People thought it was romantic, touching. The devoted widow who loved her husband so much she couldn't imagine replacing him. Idiots. It was brilliant strategy, because black and white did several things. First, it set her apart. In a court full of bright colours, scarlet velvets, sapphire silks, emerald brocades, gold brocade, Diane moved through rooms like a ghost, like a contrast, like a void, impossible to ignore. Every other woman tried to outshine each other with colour, with jewels, with elaborate embroidery and expensive fabrics. Diane wore black, simple black velvet, white lace at the collar, minimal jewellery, and she was the one everyone remembered. Second, it signalled unavailability. She wasn't on the market, wasn't looking for a new husband. Men couldn't pursue her with marriage proposals because she declared herself permanently devoted to a dead man. It gave her protection, a shield against unwanted advances, against men who thought a rich widow must be desperate for remarriage. But third, and this is the genius part, it made her mysterious, untouchable. The beautiful widow in mourning became an obsession. Men wanted what they couldn't have, and Diane, in her stark black and white, became the thing every man at court wanted but couldn't pursue. She turned a limitation into power. Widowhood could have meant irrelevance. Instead, she'd made it her brand, and she wore it like armour. Black velvet gowns, white lace collars, pearls, the only jewellery she wore regularly. Simple compared to other noblewomen's elaborate costumes, but striking, elegant, memorable. She wasn't trying to blend in. She was making sure no one could forget her. And Henry, now 13 years old, didn't forget. How could he? She was the only person who'd been kind to him, who'd listened, who'd made him feel like he mattered. And now she was free, available, not for marriage. She'd made that clear, but for something. He started visiting her at her estates, at court when she appeared. He sought her out, wanted her company, her advice, her attention. And Diane gave it, carefully, strategically. She didn't cross lines, not yet. He was still too young, too visible, too risky, but she let him adore her. Let him write her letters. Let him give her gifts. Let him believe that maybe, someday, if he was patient and devoted enough, she might love him back. She was building dependence, creating need, making herself essential to his happiness, and it worked. By the time Henry was 15, he was completely devoted to Diane, worshipped her, wore her colours at tournaments, wrote poetry about her beauty and grace. People noticed, whispered, the prince and the widow, 20 years apart in age, It was scandalous, improper, possibly illegal, depending on when exactly it became physical. Diane didn't care. She'd built her power on scandal, on being the thing everyone talked about but no one could touch. And in 1536, everything changed again. Francis, the heir, died. Suddenly, probably tuberculosis. He was 18 years old. One moment he was the future king, healthy, charming, golden. The next he was coughing blood, fevered, wasting away. Within weeks he was dead. And just like that, Henry stopped being the spare. He became the heir, the next king of France, which meant Diane, his mistress, had just become the future power behind the throne. But there was a problem, a big one. Henry needed to marry, produce heirs, secure the succession. And that marriage had already been arranged years earlier. He'd been betrothed to Catherine de Medici since 1533, and the wedding had already happened. Catherine de Medici, 14 years old when she married Henry in 1533, orphaned, Italian. Not beautiful by the standards of French court, a bit too short, face a bit too long, eyes that bulged slightly, but rich, unimaginably, obscenely rich. Her family, the Medicis, controlled the most powerful bank in Europe. They'd funded wars, bought cardinals, made and unmade kings. Catherine's dowry could fill the French treasury 3 times over and still have money left for another war. That's why King Francis I wanted the marriage. Not because he liked Catherine, not because his son wanted her, because France needed money. Desperately. Wars were expensive. The Italian campaigns had drained the coffers. The ransom for his own release from Spain had cost a fortune. Maintaining multiple royal residences, supporting mistresses, throwing lavish festivals, all expensive. Francis needed Catherine's money more than he needed his son's happiness. So the marriage was arranged. Henry, 14. Catherine, 14. Neither with any choice in the matter. The wedding took place October 28, 1533, in Marseille. Massive, public, expensive, everything a royal wedding should be. 40 days of celebrations, tournaments, feasts, plays, ballets. The entire French court descended on Marseille, along with Italian dignitaries, Spanish ambassadors, everyone who was anyone. Catherine wore cloth of gold, probably the most expensive fabric in existence, each thread literally woven with gold. The gown weighed so much she could barely walk. She looked like a golden statue, beautiful in an overwhelming, heavy way. The gown had been designed to make her look richer than she was beautiful. It worked. Henry wore silk, burgundy and gold, and under his doublet, hidden where only he would know, he wore Diane's colours. Black and white ribbons tied around his arm. During the ceremony, he stood beside Catherine, said his vows, placed a ring on her finger, kissed her briefly when required. His eyes were dead, his voice flat. He was performing a duty, sealing an alliance. That's all this was. Catherine knew. She was 14 but not stupid. She saw how he looked at her, how he didn't look at her, like she was a thing, an obligation, not a person. But the wedding was just the beginning. The bedding ceremony came next. This was tradition. The bride and groom were escorted to the marriage bed by the entire wedding party, undressed by attendants, blessed by priests, put into bed together while everyone watched. Then the witnesses withdrew, waited outside for sounds that would confirm the marriage had been consummated, because a marriage wasn't legal until it was consummated, until there was physical proof, until the bride's virginity was taken and the groom's duty fulfilled. Catherine climbed into bed, 14 years old, in a foreign country, married to a boy who didn't want her, surrounded by people who spoke a language she barely understood. She was terrified. Of course she was terrified. She knew what was coming. Her ladies had explained, had told her it would hurt, had told her to endure it, to be quiet, to not cry out. Crying out would be shameful. Henry climbed in after her, 14 years old himself, clearly not wanting to be there. resentful, angry at being forced into this marriage when he wanted Diane. What happened next was mechanical, dutiful, painful for Catherine, awkward for Henry. Neither of them wanted to be there. Neither of them knew what they were doing. But it happened. It had to happen. Witnesses were waiting. When it was over, Catherine lay there, bleeding, in pain, trying not to cry. Henry got up immediately, dressed, left without a word. The attendants came back in, examined the sheets, saw blood, confirmed the marriage was consummated. Applause from the hallway, celebration. The alliance was sealed. Catherine lay alone in the marriage bed, 14 years old, bleeding, in pain, in a foreign country, married to a boy who just treated her like an obligation, like a task to be completed, and she understood. Her marriage was a political arrangement, nothing more. Henry would never love her, would probably barely tolerate her. Her only value was her womb, her ability to produce heirs. If she could do that, she'd be safe, useful, kept. If she couldn't, she'd be discarded, annulled, sent back to Italy in shame. So she'd better figure out how to get pregnant. Fast. Except she didn't. Not for 10 years. 10 years of Henry visiting her bed out of obligation. 10 years of performing the motions without emotion or tenderness, or even basic kindness. 10 years of mechanical sex that felt like punishment. 10 years of nothing. No pregnancy, no children, no purpose. And the whispers started. Something was wrong with the Italian girl. She was barren, cursed, defective. Maybe the marriage should be annulled. Maybe Henry should marry someone else. Someone fertile, someone French. Catherine was terrified. She prayed, fasted, tried every remedy anyone suggested, drank bitter teas made from herbs, performed rituals suggested by Italian wise women, consulted physicians who poked and prodded and declared her womb cold. Cold. As if her body temperature was the problem. As if drinking hot wine and sitting by fires would magically make her fertile. Nothing worked. Year after year, nothing worked. And meanwhile, Diane thrived. By 1536, when Henry became heir after his brother's death, everyone knew. The prince and his mistress, the relationship that had been whispered about for years, was now public. Acknowledged. Impossible to ignore. Diane was 37. Henry was 17. And they were sleeping together. Definitely. Obviously. Henry made no effort to hide it, wore her colours everywhere, commissioned portraits of her, had her initials embroidered on his clothes, his horse's saddle blankets, his tournament banners, gave her jewellery, land, money. Catherine watched, unable to do anything. She was princess in waiting, future queen. But she had no power, no children, no leverage, no way to compete with a woman who'd had Henry's heart since he was a child. Just humiliation. She attended court functions where Diane sat in places of honour, where nobles bowed to Diane before acknowledging the future queen, where Henry's eyes followed Diane around the room and never once looked at his wife with even a fraction of that intensity. She watched Henry commission portraits of Diane as Diana, the huntress goddess, bare-breasted, powerful, beautiful, surrounded by hunting dogs and classical imagery. Meanwhile, Catherine's portraits showed her in dark clothes, covered head to toe, modest, pious, surrounded by empty space where children should be. She watched Henry give Diane estates, titles, access to his father's councils, while Catherine was told to focus on needlework and prayer and trying harder to get pregnant. And there was nothing she could do. She wasn't queen yet, had no authority, no allies who would risk offending Diane to help her, no children to secure her position. She was disposable, and everyone knew it. For 10 years Catherine lived like this, a wife without a husband, a future queen without power, a woman whose only purpose was reproduction, failing spectacularly at her one job. She spent those 10 years watching Diane, learning from her, because if Catherine was going to survive, she needed to understand how Diane had built such absolute power. And what she learned was this: Diane gave Henry something Catherine couldn't: stability, comfort, the feeling of being chosen rather than assigned. Henry had spent 4 years as a prisoner, 4 years understanding he was disposable, that his father had traded him, that love and protection were conditional. Diane made him feel valued, chosen, special. She'd picked him when he was nobody, the spare prince, the broken boy no one wanted, and Henry never forgot that. Never stopped being grateful, never stopped needing her. Catherine couldn't compete with that. She'd been assigned to Henry, another transaction, another political arrangement, another person using him for her own purposes. She could never be what Diane was, the person who'd chosen him freely, who'd seen him when he was worthless and decided he mattered anyway. All Catherine could be was useful, and to be useful, she needed children. So she kept trying, kept summoning Henry to her bed, kept enduring mechanical sex that clearly bored him, kept hoping that eventually, somehow, she'd get pregnant. And then something strange happened. According to some accounts, Diane de Poitiers helped her. Why would Henry's mistress help his barren wife get pregnant? It makes no sense, unless you understand Diane's strategy. Because Diane was playing a longer game. She understood that if Catherine was cast aside for infertility, Henry would have to remarry. A new wife, a younger wife, probably a French princess this time, not an Italian banker's daughter. A wife who might actually have influence over him, who might threaten Diane's position, who might be young and beautiful and interesting enough to compete. Diane couldn't let that happen. She was 34, aging beautifully, but still aging. She couldn't compete with a 16-year-old princess if Henry decided he wanted a fresh start. She needed Catherine exactly where she was, powerless, failing, grateful for any scrap of help. So according to the rumours, and these rumours come from multiple sources, including Catherine's own later writings, Diane advised Catherine, told her what to eat, what exercises to do, when to summon Henry to her bed, told her positions, timing, details no mistress should know about her lover's wife's attempts to conceive. Imagine being Catherine, receiving fertility advice from your husband's mistress, the woman who shares his bed more often than you do, the woman he actually loves, having to smile, to say thank you, to pretend this isn't the most humiliating conversation you've ever had. But Catherine was desperate. She'd been married 11 years, still no children. The pressure was crushing. So she swallowed her pride, listened to Diane's advice, and it worked. In 1544, 11 years into her marriage, Catherine finally got pregnant. She spent the entire pregnancy terrified, convinced something would go wrong, that she'd miscarry, that the baby would be stillborn, that this one chance would slip away. She prayed constantly, barely left her rooms, followed every superstition, did everything the physicians and midwives recommended, and on January 19th, 1544, she gave birth to Francis, a son, an heir, finally. The relief was overwhelming. She'd done it, proven herself capable. The marriage was secure. She wouldn't be discarded. But she got pregnant again almost immediately. Because now that it worked once, Henry visited more often. Duty was lighter when it came with results. She gave birth to Elizabeth in 1545, Claude in 1547, Louis in 1549, Charles in 1550, Henry in 1551, Marguerite in 1553, Francis in 55. Twin girls in 56, one died almost immediately, the other died 2 years later. 10 pregnancies in 15 years. 10 times her body swelled and stretched and tore. 10 times she risked death in childbirth. 3 of those children died young, but 7 survived, enough to secure the succession multiple times over, enough to prove her worth beyond question. And through all of it, every pregnancy, every birth, every recovery, Diane remained. Henry's constant, his true love, the woman he actually wanted. Catherine was the broodmare. Diane was the beloved. Catherine spent those years constantly pregnant or recovering from pregnancy, Her body was destroyed. Stretch marks, sagging breasts, hair thinning from repeated pregnancies, teeth loosening. Pregnancy leached calcium from your bones and teeth. Some women lost teeth with every child. She was exhausted, constantly tired, her body never fully recovering before the next pregnancy began. Meanwhile, Diane remained beautiful, elegant, untouched by the biological burden of providing heirs. Because that was the genius of Diane's position. She had all the power of a queen without any of the physical cost. And when Henry's father died in 1547, when Henry became king, Diane's position became absolutely unassailable. 1547. King Francis I died March 31st. Heart failure probably. He'd lived hard, fought wars, kept mistresses, eaten like every meal might be his last. Drank wine by the gallon, gorged on meat and pastries and rich sauces. His heart gave out. He was 52 years old. Not old by modern standards, ancient by 16th century ones, especially for men who'd lived as hard as Francis. He died at the Château de Rambouillet, surrounded by courtiers and priests and his weeping mistress. His son Henry was summoned, arrived in time to watch his father die. Did Henry grieve? Maybe, probably. Francis had been a distant father, but not a cruel one. He'd made mistakes. Trading his sons for his freedom was a big one. But he'd never been deliberately vicious, but grief took a backseat to practicality. Because the moment Francis died, Henry became King Henry II of France. 28 years old, handsome, athletic, intense, and utterly devoted to Diane de Poitiers, who was 48, still breathtakingly beautiful, still elegant in her eternal mourning blacks and whites, and about to become the most powerful woman in France. She wasted no time. Within days, literally days of Henry's coronation, Diane was moving, making changes, establishing control. She started with the palaces, Fontainebleau, the Louvre, every royal residence. She hired architects, designers, artists, commissioned renovations on a massive scale. And everywhere, carved into stone, woven into tapestries, painted on ceilings, her monogram appeared. 2 interlaced Ds, except here's the brilliant part. Henry's royal cipher was 2 interlaced 8s, and the letters, when stylized, looked almost identical. HD. From a distance, you couldn't tell which letter you were looking at. That was intentional. Diane wanted everyone to see them as intertwined, inseparable, equal. She also did something unprecedented. She started signing state documents, not as Queen, Catherine held that title, but as Mistress en titre, declared mistress, official, recognised, with actual authority. Her signature appeared on royal decrees, land grants, tax exemptions, foreign correspondence, next to Henry's signature. Sometimes even above it. Ambassadors who wanted access to Henry went through Diane first. She controlled his schedule, decided who got meetings and when, filtered information, shaped his understanding of events. She attended council meetings, sat beside Henry while he made policy decisions, advised on appointments, foreign policy, military strategy, financial matters. She was, in every practical way, co-ruler of France. And the money was obscene. Henry gave her the crown jewels, the actual French crown jewels that had belonged to queens for generations. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, pearls. Some pieces were centuries old, priceless. Catherine, the actual queen, had to attend state functions wearing paste replicas. Fake diamonds made from glass, coloured stones, costume jewellery, while Diane glittered in the real thing. Imagine being Catherine, your queen. You wear the crown at coronations and ceremonies. You've given the king 10 children, 7 of whom survived. You've done everything required of you, and the jewels that should be yours, that symbolise your position, that have been worn by queens of France since the Middle Ages, they're on someone else's body. Someone who shares your husband's bed more often than you do. Someone he actually loves. The humiliation was total, public, inescapable. But Diane wasn't done. Henry gave her the Château de Chenonceau, one of the most beautiful properties in France, built over the river Cher. Stunning Renaissance architecture, elegant, picturesque, the kind of palace that appears in fairy tales. Catherine had specifically asked for it, begged Henry for it, told him how much she loved it, how perfect it would be for her to host court functions. He said no to his wife and gave it to his mistress. Diane took possession immediately, moved in, started renovations, hired the most famous architect in France, Philibert Delorme, to design gardens and expansions. She created stunning formal gardens, geometric patterns, fountains, rare plants, a vegetable garden that produced food for the chateau and for sale to nearby towns, because Diane was practical about profit. She turned Chenonceau into a showplace, the most beautiful chateau in France, her personal palace, and Catherine watched, unable to do anything. She was queen but owned nothing, controlled nothing, mattered not at all except as a womb. She spent those years constantly pregnant or recovering, her body bearing child after child. While Diane remained beautiful and powerful and untouchable, Diane's beauty routine during these years was legendary and absolutely brutal. Every morning, without fail, she bathed in ice-cold water. Not cool water, not room temperature, ice-cold, winter or summer, rain or shine, sick or healthy, didn't matter. She'd wake before dawn, go to her bathing room where servants had already prepared the bath, tubs filled with water that had been kept cold overnight, sometimes with actual ice added in winter. She'd strip, climb in, and sit there while servants poured more cold water over her shoulders. How long? Sources disagree. Some say 15 minutes, some say an hour. Either way, it was torture. Imagine it. You're 48 years old. Your body wants warmth, comfort, rest. Instead, you're sitting in water so cold it makes your chest seize, makes your skin go numb, makes every nerve scream at you to get out. But you don't. You sit there, because this is what keeps your skin tight. What prevents sagging? What maintains the illusion of youth? Why did she believe this medieval medical theory? The idea that cold tightened the skin, kept it firm, prevented the loosening that came with age. Did it actually work? Probably somewhat. Cold water does constrict blood vessels, tighten skin temporarily, and the sheer discipline of it, the daily torture, probably kept her body in a state of alertness, stress that manifested as leanness. But mostly, it worked because Diane believed it worked, and belief is powerful. After the bath, she'd dry off, dress in clothes that had been warmed by the fire, because she wasn't insane. She knew she needed warmth eventually. Then she'd ride horses, for hours, long after most noblewomen her age would have stopped. She rode every single day, hard rides, across countryside, hunting sometimes, just exercising other times. This kept her body strong, lean, muscular in a way that was unusual for women of her class and age. Most noble women barely walked by the time they hit 40. They sat, embroidered, got soft. Diane rode, kept her body hard. She also ate carefully. Her diet was bizarre for the time. Most aristocrats gorged on meat and pastries. Heavy food, rich sauces, wine by the barrel. Diane ate vegetables, fresh fruit, small portions of lean meat, fish, very little wine. Lots of water, unusual when most people drank wine or beer because water was often contaminated. She believed in moderation, in not burdening the body, in eating for function rather than pleasure. It probably saved her life. Most aristocrats died of gout, heart failure, or complications from obesity. Diane stayed lean and healthy because she ate like an athlete. She also slept in cold rooms, kept windows open even in winter, wore light night clothes, believed that warmth made the body weak. That cold kept you alert, strong, young, and she avoided cosmetics. This was radical. Most noble women painted their faces with lead-based white paint, reddened their cheeks with mercury compounds. Used coal around their eyes. These cosmetics were poisonous. They caused skin damage, hair loss, sometimes death from slow poisoning. Diane used almost none of it, just her natural skin. Maybe some rose water, minimal makeup, and it worked. Contemporary accounts, from people who had no reason to flatter her, describe her at age 50 as having skin like marble. Smooth, pale, flawless, no age spots, no sagging, no visible signs of aging. Her hair stayed dark. Whether naturally or with some herbal treatment, sources don't say. But it didn't go grey, didn't thin. Her body stayed firm, lean, strong. No loose skin, no sagging breasts, no soft belly. She looked a decade younger than Catherine, who was actually 14 years younger, because Catherine's body had been destroyed by childbearing. 10 pregnancies in 15 years. Her body never recovering, always stretched, always tired, always aging faster than it should. While Diane maintained herself like a work of art, like a weapon, like armour, because that's what beauty was for her. Not vanity, not pleasure, power, the foundation of everything she'd built. If Henry stopped desiring her, she'd lose everything. So she made sure he never stopped desiring her. For 12 years it worked. But armour has weaknesses, and time is patient. By 1559, Henry was 40 years old. Diane was 60, and cracks were starting to show. Not in Diane's appearance. She was still stunning, still elegant, still beautiful enough to make men half her age stare. But in Henry's, court, murmurs, quiet suggestions, whispers that maybe the king was too devoted to his mistress, that it looked weak, that other kings, younger kings, might see it as vulnerability. Henry didn't care, or couldn't help it. He'd been trained by Diane for so long that he couldn't imagine governing without her. She was his advisor, his confidant, his lover, his everything. Catherine was just the woman who had his children, who stood beside him at state functions, who wore the crown while Diane wore the jewels. And for 12 years that arrangement worked. The system was functional. Catherine produced heirs. Diane ran the kingdom. Henry played king and lover. It was sustainable, perfect even. Until June 30th, 1559. Henry II loved tournaments. Loved them obsessively. The clash of lances, the thunder of horses, the crowd's roar. The moment of impact when skill and courage were tested. It was dangerous. Everyone knew it. Men died regularly in tournaments. Lances could pierce armour. Skulls could be crushed. Bones shattered. Necks broken. But Henry was good. Strong. Experienced. Athletic. He'd competed dozens of times without serious injury. A few broken fingers. Some bruised ribs. Nothing catastrophic. He felt invincible. At 40, he was at the peak of his power. King of France, respected military commander, devoted husband, technically, devoted lover, actually, father to 10 children, and in love, still desperately in love with Diane. 23 years after their relationship began, still wearing her colours, still commissioning portraits, still giving her everything. June 30th, 1559 was a celebration. His daughter Elizabeth had just married King Philip II of Spain, the most powerful king in Europe. It was a massive political alliance, a peace treaty, an end to decades of Franco-Spanish conflict. Reason for festivals, tournaments, celebrations, 40 days of festivities, everyone who was anyone at court, foreign ambassadors, Spanish dignitaries, Italian nobles, the entire French aristocracy. And Henry decided to compete. One last joust, one more chance to perform for the crowd. For France, for Diane, watching from the royal box in her black and white. He was 40 years old. Too old for this, really. Most men his age had stopped competing, left tournaments to younger men, watched from the stands with wives and mistresses. But Henry wanted one more moment, one more chance to prove himself, to feel young, to hear the crowd roar. He dressed in armour, had it fitted that morning, his personal armour, decorated, expensive, well made but also designed to look impressive. Gold inlay, engravings, his monogram, the intertwined H's that looked so much like Diane's intertwined D's. Diane's colours sewn into his surcoat. Black and white, always black and white. Her favour tied to his arm, a ribbon she'd given him that morning. He mounted his warhorse. A massive animal, trained for tournaments, 17 hands high, black coat, temperamental but powerful. He rode into the lists. The crowd roared. This was their king, warrior, champion. His opponent was Gabriel de Montgomery, captain of the Scottish Guard, 35 years old, skilled jousters, experienced, but not as experienced as the king. Montgomery didn't want this match. You could see it in his hesitation, in how he sat on his horse. He knew the danger, knew that accidents happened, knew that if something went wrong, he'd be blamed. But you don't refuse a king. You do what he commands. They prepared, lances distributed, 14 feet long, wooden, designed to shatter on impact. Blunted tips. This wasn't war, just sport, but still dangerous. The marshal signalled. They charged, lances lowered, two massive war horses thundering toward each other. The ground shaking, the crowd holding its breath. That moment before impact. Time seems to slow. You can see every detail. The horse's muscles bunching, the opponent's lance tip aimed at your chest, your own heartbeat loud in your ears. Impact. The lances met. Both hit true. The sound like thunder. Like the world cracking open. Both lances shattered. Splinters of wood exploding into the air. Pieces flying everywhere. The horses staggering from the force. The crowd erupted. Perfect joust. Both men skilled. Both lances broken. Exactly as it should be. Normal protocol. When both lances break, you stop. The joust is over. It's a draw. Honour satisfied. But Henry wasn't satisfied. He wanted to win. Wanted one more pass. One more chance to break Montgomery's lance without having his own broken. To prove superiority. He called for fresh lances, signalled to the marshal. One more pass. Montgomery hesitated. Everyone saw it. He didn't want to continue, wanted to call it a draw. Accept honour and walk away, but the king commanded. So Montgomery accepted a fresh lance. They charged again. Lances levelled. Horses screaming now. The animals were tired, wound up, moving at full speed a second time. The crowd was nervous. You could feel it. This wasn't normal. Kings didn't do second passes. Not at 40 years old. Not when honour was already satisfied. But Henry charged, and Montgomery charged, because what else could he do? The lances met. Montgomery's lance hit Henry's breastplate. Should have shattered cleanly. Should have broken into harmless pieces like the first one. It didn't. The wood splintered unevenly. Part of it broke away. But one long splinter, sharp, jagged, moving at devastating speed, didn't break. It pierced the gap in Henry's visor. The eye hole. That small opening where vision required vulnerability. The splinter went through his right eye, through the socket, into his brain. Kept going. Came out near his ear. Henry fell. Like a puppet with cut strings, crashed to the ground. The impact massive. Armour clanging against earth. Blood everywhere, pouring from his face, from the visor, from the gap in the armour. The crowd went silent. That terrible silence when everyone knows something. Catastrophic just happened, but doesn't want to believe it yet. Then screaming. Catherine screamed. Diane screamed. Courtiers rushed forward. Attendants ran to him, tried to remove his helmet. The visor was jammed. Splinters of wood wedged in the mechanism. Blood making everything slippery. They finally got it off. His face was destroyed. His right eye gone. Just blood and wood and bone. The splinter still embedded in his skull near his ear. He was conscious, somehow still conscious, trying to speak, trying to understand what happened. They carried him from the field, still alive, still breathing somehow, but everyone who knew anything about head wounds knew. This was bad, probably fatal, almost certainly fatal. The greatest physicians in France couldn't save him from this. They took him to the Palace of Tournelle, laid him in bed, summoned every physician, every surgeon, every medical expert in France. They couldn't help. This was 1559. No antibiotics, no anesthesia, no understanding of brain injuries or infection control. No way to repair what was broken. But they tried. God, they tried. They performed trepanation, drilling holes into his skull to relieve pressure. This was done while Henry was conscious, tied to the bed, screaming. They bored into living bone with metal drills, manually, while he begged them to stop. They did bloodletting, cut his arms, drained blood into bowls, thinking it would reduce fever. It just made him weaker, paler, more likely to die from blood loss before the head wound could kill him. They applied poultices, mixtures of herbs and animal fat pressed against his skull, supposed to draw out infection. They did nothing. They consulted astrologers, checked planetary alignments, calculated whether Saturn's position meant he'd live or die, as if the planets cared. They prayed, hours of prayer, priests at his bedside constantly, chanting, blessing, performing last rites just in case, then rescinding them when he rallied briefly, then performing them again when he got worse. Henry lingered. For 10 days, 10 days of agony that defied comprehension. The splinter had driven bone fragments into his brain. His eye socket was infected. His brain was swelling. Fever climbed. He had seizures, convulsions so violent it took 4 men to hold him down. Between seizures, he had moments of clarity, terrible moments when he understood he was dying, when he could feel his body failing, when he tried to give final orders and couldn't get words out. He asked for Diane, repeatedly, called her name during lucid moments, wanted to see her, to say goodbye, to hold her hand one last time. Catherine blocked her, every time, guards at the door, orders that Diane de Poitiers was not to be admitted, not to see the king, not for any reason. For 23 years Diane had been Henry's everything, his lover, his advisor, his world, the person he'd chosen, the person he needed. And now, when he was dying, she couldn't even hold his hand. She sent messages, begged, pleaded, reminded the guards of her position, threatened, offered bribes. Nothing worked. Catherine's orders were absolute. The Queen finally had power, and she used it. Diane paced outside the palace, waited for news, sent servants to ask about his condition, got vague answers. The same. No change. Still alive. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything but wait. Inside, Catherine sat with Henry, the wife, the mother of his children, the woman he'd neglected for their entire marriage. She held his hand, wiped his forehead, whispered to him, made sure she was the last face he saw during lucid moments. Did she forgive him? Probably not. Did she feel satisfaction? Absolutely. This was her moment. Finally, after 26 years. Henry II died July 10th, 1559, 40 years old, 10 days of unimaginable agony, his skull fractured, his brain infected, his body finally giving up. And the moment he died, the literal moment his heart stopped, everything changed. Catherine was no longer just queen. She was queen mother, regent for her 15-year-old son, Francis II. And she'd waited 26 years for this moment. Catherine moved with a speed that suggested she'd been planning this for years, which she had. Within hours of Henry's death, she sent soldiers to every property Diane owned, every chateau, every estate, every piece of land Henry had given her over 23 years. The orders were simple: inventory everything, seize what belonged to the crown. Diane de Poitiers was to return everything given to her by the late king. Everything. The crown jewels, first priority. Soldiers collected them personally from Diane's residence. Every piece, every stone, every setting. Made an inventory, checked it twice, made sure nothing was missing. Diane handed them over. What choice did she have? She had no legal claim. They'd been given by a king. That king was dead. The new king, really his mother, wanted them back. Catherine put them on immediately, the moment she had them back. She wore them to Henry's funeral. The real diamonds, the rubies, the emeralds, the pearls that had belonged to queens of France for generations. After 26 years of wearing paste replicas, she finally wore the real thing. And it felt like victory, like justice, like the world finally acknowledging what should have been hers from the beginning. The Château de Chenonceau, Catherine wanted it, specifically, immediately, that property above all others. Diane had no legal claim there either. Henry had given it to her, but it was crown property. And now Catherine was regent. She had absolute authority. She didn't just seize it, she forced an exchange. Diane could keep the Château de Chaumont, a significantly less impressive property. Dark, gloomy, none of Chenonceau's beauty. But Chenonceau was Catherine's, non-negotiable. Sign the papers or face legal action that would strip everything. Diane signed. She had no choice. She left Chenonceau, the chateau she'd redesigned, the gardens she'd commissioned, the palace she'd made her own, where she'd hosted Henry, where they'd spent summers, where she'd ruled. Catherine moved in immediately, within weeks, brought her own furniture, her own staff, started renovations immediately. She built the famous gallery, the two-story structure that spans the River Cher, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements of the Renaissance. Still standing today, still breathtaking. She expanded the gardens, made them more elaborate than Diane's, more expensive, more impressive, because Catherine wanted everyone to know. Chenonceau wasn't Diane's anymore. It never had been really. It belonged to the Queen. Always had, always would. And when people visited, ambassadors, nobles, foreign dignitaries, Catherine made sure they understood. This was hers. She'd reclaimed it. From the woman who'd stolen her husband. The other estates, the titles, the money, most of it was seized. Diane had been strategic enough to put some properties in her own name legally. Those she kept. But the bulk of her wealth, the visible symbols of power, was gone, stripped away in a single day. Catherine didn't have her arrested, didn't have her executed. That would have been too kind, too quick, too merciful, too much like acknowledging Diane as a threat worth eliminating. Catherine wanted Diane to live, to survive, to spend years understanding what she'd lost, to watch from exile as Catherine ruled. As Catherine's sons became kings, as Catherine shaped France, so Catherine exiled her, sent her to the Château d'Anay, Diane's personal property, the one she'd built herself years earlier, beautiful, isolated, far from Paris, far from court, far from power, told her to stay there, to disappear, to live out her remaining years in obscurity, away from court, away from politics, away from anything that mattered. Diane de Poitiers, the most powerful woman in France for 23 years, was erased in a single afternoon. She was 60 years old, still beautiful by most accounts, still elegant in her eternal blacks and whites, still sharp, still capable, but powerless, irrelevant, forgotten by everyone who'd once courted her favour. She packed her things, or what was left of them, took her servants, the ones loyal enough to follow her into exile, her remaining jewellery, what Catherine hadn't seized, her dignity. And she left. No scenes, no begging, no appeals to Catherine's mercy that wouldn't come anyway. Just left. Quietly. Like she'd always known this moment would come eventually. Like she'd been preparing for it for years. Because she probably had. At Annette, Diane lived quietly. For 7 years. She managed her remaining estates. She'd always been good at that. Practical, strategic. She knew how to make properties profitable, how to manage accounts, how to invest wisely. She corresponded with the few friends brave enough to still acknowledge her. Not many. Most courtiers had cut ties immediately, too risky to associate with the former mistress of a dead king. But a few remained, loyal, or at least sympathetic. They wrote letters, visited occasionally, brought news from court, news that Catherine was ruling effectively, that she'd taken control of the regency, that her son Francis II was king in name, but Catherine held real power. News that Catherine had moved into Chenonceau, had renovated it, had made it more beautiful than Diane ever had. Diane read these letters, probably smiled bitterly, recognized the message. You're erased, replaced, forgotten. She walked her gardens, the ones she'd designed at Annette, still beautiful, still carefully maintained. Her servants kept them perfect, because that's what Diane had always demanded, perfection. She read Latin, Greek, French poetry, philosophy. She'd always been educated, always loved learning. Now she had time for it. She aged, finally, without the pressure to maintain impossible standards. She could let her hair go grey, could skip the ice baths, probably a relief after decades of torture, could eat what she wanted, could rest. It should have been freedom. In a way it was. She didn't have to perform anymore, didn't have to be beautiful for a king, didn't have to be strategic, didn't have to compete, didn't have to maintain the armour. She could just be human, aging, mortal. But it was also prison, because Annette was isolated, away from everything, away from the world that had once revolved around her. She could walk her gardens but couldn't visit court, could manage her estates but couldn't influence policy, could read about politics but couldn't participate. She was alive, but irrelevant, and irrelevance for a woman who'd ruled France was its own kind of death. She died April 25th, 1566, 66 years old. Natural causes, just old age, her body giving up after decades of discipline and stress and punishment. She was buried in the chapel at Annette, the chapel she'd commissioned. Modest tomb, simple inscription. Nothing like the grand monuments she'd commissioned during her reign. No state funeral, no national mourning, no kings or queens attending. Just servants, a few loyal friends, a priest, quiet, private, forgotten, and Catherine. Catherine didn't attend, didn't send condolences, didn't acknowledge Diane's death publicly. She was too busy, running France, ruling as regent for her son Francis. And when Francis died in 1560, just a year after his father, ruling for her next son, Charles IX. And when Charles died in 1574, ruling for her third son, Henry III. 3 kings, all her sons, all under her control. For 30 years, Catherine ruled France, not as queen. She'd lost that position when Henry died, but as queen mother, regent, the power behind 3 thrones. She navigated the wars of religion, the brutal conflict between Catholics and Protestants that tore France apart. She made alliances, broke them, survived, assassination attempts, destroyed enemies. She became one of the most powerful women in European history, respected, feared, influential beyond measure, and she lived in Chenonceau, walked through rooms that had been Diane's, slept in chambers Diane had commissioned, looked at gardens Diane had planted, and smiled, because this had been Diane's. This should have been Diane's forever, and now it was hers, and would be hers until she died. And then would belong to France, to queens who came after, but never to Diane again. That was Catherine's final victory. So let's talk about what this story actually means. Because it's easy to make this about Catherine versus Diane, the wife versus the mistress, the wronged woman versus the seductress, good versus evil. It's more complicated than that. It's always more complicated. Both women were trapped in a system that gave them almost no legitimate power. Catherine was queen, but queenship meant nothing without a king's favour. She wore a crown but owned nothing, controlled nothing, mattered only as a womb. Diane was a mistress, which meant everything until the king died. For 23 years she had real power, more than most queens, then nothing, overnight, because her power was borrowed, dependent entirely on Henry's desire and Henry's life. Neither position was secure, neither was fair. Both required constant performance, constant strategy, constant awareness that one wrong move could mean destruction. And both women played the game brilliantly, with different strategies, different tools, but equal ruthlessness. Catherine's strategy was survival, patience, outlasting. She endured 26 years of humiliation, buried 3 children, watched her husband love someone else, never complained publicly, never caused scenes, just waited. Because she understood something fundamental. Queens outlast mistresses, always, eventually. Time was her weapon, and she wielded it perfectly. Diane's strategy was performance, beauty, control. She made herself indispensable, understood what Henry needed before he did, maintained impossible standards of elegance and desirability, built monuments so she'd be remembered even after power faded, because she understood that mistresses without crowns needed physical proof of their power. Chateau, art, architecture, things that would outlast the king's favour and the king's life. Both strategies worked. For a time, both women got what they wanted: power, influence, legacy, but both paid enormous prices. Catherine spent 26 years powerless, watching another woman wear her jewels, live in her palaces, sleep with her husband. She had 10 children, but no power during her marriage, a crown, but no authority. Beauty destroyed by constant childbearing, while her rival remained perfect. She got revenge eventually, got to rule France for 30 years. But she never got love, never got to be young and beautiful and desired, never got a husband who wanted her, never got those years back. Diane got 23 years of absolute power, got to be desired, celebrated, feared, got to rule France without the burden of childbearing, got to remain beautiful through discipline and strategy, got to matter, but she got 7 years of exile, watching everything she'd built get stripped away, dying forgotten, powerless, alone, her monuments claimed by the woman she'd humiliated. Neither won. Not really. Both survived, both mattered. Both left marks on history that lasted centuries, but neither got what they actually wanted deep down. Love, security, recognition, peace, the simple human need to matter and be safe, because the system didn't give women those things. It gave them roles: wife, mistress, queen, each role with specific rules, specific limitations, specific ways to be destroyed if you stepped wrong. And both Diane and Catherine understood that their real enemy wasn't each other. It was the system, the structure that made women compete for scraps of power through men. That made beauty currency. That made childbearing the only legitimate value a wife could offer. That made power always borrowed, always temporary, always dependent on male favour. But they couldn't fight the system. Too big, too entrenched, too powerful, backed by law and religion and centuries of tradition. So they fought each other. For 26 years. A cold war waged in glances and seating arrangements and jewellery choices, in pregnancies and beauty routines and strategic silences, in every public appearance where one woman shone and the other suffered. And when Henry died, when the war finally ended, what did either of them win? Catherine got Chenonceau, the crown jewels, 30 years of power, the satisfaction of watching her enemy die powerless, the chance to rule France and shape history, sons who became kings, a legacy as one of the most powerful women in European history. Diane got 7 years of exile, a quiet death, a modest tomb, and the memory of 23 years when she'd been extraordinary, when she'd ruled without a crown, when she'd been powerful enough to make queens irrelevant. Different prizes, different costs, but the same fundamental truth underneath it all. All power is temporary, all beauty fades, all favour shifts. You can do everything right, be strategic, be careful, be brilliant, be disciplined beyond human endurance, and still lose everything in 10 days. in one tournament accident, in the time it takes a lance to splinter wrong. Because you're mortal, your king is mortal, and someone's always waiting for you to fall. Today, if you visit Chenonceau, you'll see both women's marks: Diane's gardens, Catherine's gallery, Diane's designs, Catherine's expansions, Diane's vision, Catherine's triumph. You can't separate them. Can't visit one woman's legacy without walking through the others. Can't admire the chateau without understanding that every room has two stories. Every stone was fought over. Every beauty hides a brutality. That's fitting. They were intertwined. Enemies, yes. Rivals, absolutely. But also the only two women in France who understood what the other was doing, who recognized the game, who played it better than anyone else. They didn't like each other. Didn't need to. They just needed to survive each other. And they both did, for different lengths of time, with different outcomes. But both survived, both mattered. Both refused to disappear completely. Diane de Poitiers didn't run France because she was queen. She ran it because she understood what the king needed, because she made herself indispensable, because she was strategic enough to help her rival get pregnant to secure her own position. Smart enough to turn borrowed power into permanent legacy through architecture and art. Catherine de Medici didn't win because she was patient. She won because she outlasted, because she understood that queens outlive mistresses, always, because she turned humiliation into fuel and waited decades for revenge, because she knew that time was on her side as long as she survived. They were both magnificent, both ruthless, both brilliant. And they both understood something we're still learning today. Power isn't given, it's taken, built, maintained, and lost in an instant if you're not careful. If fortune turns, if a lance splinters wrong. Diane lost hers in 10 days. 23 years of control gone. Because she'd built her empire on sand, on a man's desire, on beauty that couldn't last forever, even with ice baths and discipline, on favour that died when he did. Catherine found hers in the same 10 days. 26 years of waiting, rewarded, because she'd built her power on stone, on children, on legitimacy, on things that outlasted lust and beauty and midnight promises. Neither strategy was wrong. Both were brilliant in their own ways. Both required almost superhuman discipline and endurance, but only one survived the king's death. And that's the real lesson of Diane de Poitiers and Catherine de Medici. Not that one was good and one was evil. Not that wives are better than mistresses, or patience beats beauty, or queens beat lovers. But that women in their positions had no good choices. Just survival strategies. Just ways to navigate a world designed to destroy them. Just different paths through the same brutal landscape, and they both navigated brilliantly. Made themselves matter. Changed history. Refused to be forgotten, even when forgetting them would have been easier. Diane built chateaux. Catherine reclaimed them. Diane commissioned art. Catherine displayed it and added her own. Diane ruled for 23 years. Catherine ruled for 30. Different timelines, different methods, same desperate drive to matter in a world that wanted women silent and powerless and interchangeable. And 500 years later, we're still talking about them, still fascinated, still trying to understand how a mistress ran France and how a queen got revenge, and what it cost both of them. Because their story isn't just history, it's a pattern that repeats. Women competing for power through men. Women using the only tools available: beauty, childbearing, strategy, patience, performance. Women surviving systems designed to destroy them. The words change, the dynamics don't. And that's why Diane and Catherine's story still matters. Still resonates as it still feels relevant 5 centuries later. Not because it's romantic, it isn't. Not because it's a morality tale, it's not. But because it shows us what women do when given no good options. When trapped in impossible positions. When forced to compete for survival. They strategize. They endure. They refuse to disappear. They build legacies that outlast their enemies' revenge. Diane de Poitiers ran France without a crown. Catherine de Medici got revenge without mercy. Both changed history. Both mattered. Both won in their own ways. Both lost in their own ways. And both refused to be forgotten. That's power. Not the kind you're born with, not the kind you marry into, but the kind you build. Stone by stone, decision by decision, day by day, survival by survival, breath by breath through ice-cold baths and endless pregnancies and humiliation and triumph and loss. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just surviving is victory. Sometimes just mattering, even for 23 years, even for 30 years, even for a moment, is worth whatever it costs. Sleep well tonight, knowing that 500 years ago, 2 women fought a war that changed France. That power is always temporary, but legacy can be permanent. That beauty fades, but monuments last. That revenge is sweet, but survival is sweeter. That both women won and both women lost, and somehow that's the most human thing about them. And that somewhere in France, a chateau still stands. Built by one woman, claimed by another. Belonging to both, belonging to neither. Belonging to history now. A monument to women who refused to disappear. Who played a rigged game and found ways to win anyway. Who understood that power was temporary, but memory could be eternal. Thanks for staying with me tonight. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Did Diane deserve what happened? Was Catherine justified? Was Henry the victim or the enabler? Who really won? Let's talk about it. Because this story, it never ends. As long as women compete for power in systems designed to keep them powerless, Diane and Catherine's war continues. Just with different names, different faces, different weapons, same desperation, same brilliance, same refusal to disappear. And if you want more stories like this, stories about women who built power from nothing, who refused to stay silent, who changed history without permission, who survived impossible odds, subscribe. Because we're just getting started. There are so many more women like Diane and Catherine. Women who were called mistresses or villains or manipulators when they were really just survivors, just strategists, just humans trying to matter in worlds that wanted them erased. And we're going to tell every single one of their stories. Good night.